Hey everybody, this is Perch. The concept of AI art, Chat GBT, some of these functionalities, they're certainly controversial. A lot of people have an opinion on them, and generally, what's funny is that there's a I don't like them approach, which is fine. A lot of the AI art does look super weird. Why do people have so many teeth in AI art? That is weird. But there is almost a kind of religious, if you ever touch AI art ever again, you are a fascist kind of, overreaction, the classic Twitter overreaction that goes on. And to me, it feels like NFTs. Remember people who were out of their mind about NFTs? Remember people who are out of their mind about Indiegogo being, for Nazis? Just kind of these various things that people are like, this is the worst thing in the history of the world. Where are NFTs now? Does anyone give a single shit about NFTs? All of that kind of crazy. Remember the people, do you remember a lot of comic book people freaking out over blockchain? And they freaked out about blockchain. I remember what Heather Antos is just on and on and on. Blockchain was environmentally killing the planet. And it was killing the planet because it was, it was like to run the blockchain, it takes the energy from over 5 million people all starving in the deepest like just the most like that. That's not how, sir, that's not how technology works. Not even a little bit. Like if I ever want to feel good about myself, I will read comic creators talking about technology, like blockchain and NFTs and some of these other things. It is laughable. I'm sorry, full stop laughable. But AI art certainly is kind of the thing you're supposed to be pissed off at today. And I did a video with Joe about it. It did make people mad. Like people didn't like my take. And my take was generally along the lines of, look, I just don't think that a lot of this AI art is going to really go anywhere. I mean, it sounds nice, but I don't really think it's going to matter. The idea that AI art is going to replace comic book art, it feels more science fiction than reality. So we'll see. I think it's like NFTs. I think it's something that we're all supposed to be scared of and pissed off about. But the reality of it being used for any kind of mass production seems low to me. It doesn't mean that, should artists' work be, run through a computer and mashed up and stolen? Well, no, I don't know about nobody, but I'm certainly not advocating for that. I don't know, but people who are not getting credit for their stuff, no doubt about it. I can't help but notice a lot of the same people who are pissed off about AI art are, in fact, are talking about the fun things they're doing with ChatGPT. Like, man, if I had this in school, it could have written my term papers. It's like, you do realize that is the same technology, the same concept as AI art. You do realize it is the same thing. Somebody wrote that stuff originally, and the computer is kind of vomiting it back out at you. So, why is writing? I mean, hell, can I use ChatGPT to write a coherent, a comic? I would like maybe I should try. I mean, I'll try this later. I'll use ChatGPT to like write me a conclusion to the Krakoa era of the X-Men. Help us all out. Anyway, but what's funny about AI art is that there's another practice that I think is worse, and that's soul, tracing, or the copy and pasting that's happened. And we've seen creators. I mean, you see people like, I won't mention the artist, but you all know who I'm talking about. The one who, uses lots of porn expressions in his art. But, we've seen lots of traced material show up in comic books. Is that somehow, how is that not as bad as AI art? I think it's absolutely as bad. So here's a mail that comes in. It says, "Dear Sir Perchington, I'm writing this mail and not another YouTuber because my goal is not to sass out the artist, but to ask the question, with the advance of technology, what level of use of the available technology is accepted as art? Recently, an issue of Harley Quinn got into my hands, and halfway through, I started getting the feeling that I was looking at a Find the Difference quiz book for kids rather than a comic. Sometimes the artist was reusing assets with just slight modification, but sometimes they didn't even bother with that. I have seen artists doing that many times with backgrounds or with talking head panels, but never really noticed it with characters that are the focus of the panel. This writer is pointing, this is happening more and more for sure. Maybe because this time the plot was not that engaging or entertaining for me, the person doing the colors was working hard to hide the recycling so it wouldn't be blatantly obvious. And this kind of practice is already, this kind of practice is already accepted and expected in animation. But in comics, when first appearing, digital art was frowned upon. While not too long ago, the overuse of talking head panels was severely criticized, and currently AI art is bashed for being nothing more than inferior copies or collages. So me seeing this comic and remembering these arguments against the use of technology, I was wondering if there was ever a hard line in the sand somewhere, or anything goes as far as the audience doesn't notice or care. I understand that making comics takes considerable time, and that manga can get around that by compartmentalizing the process and distributing work between several people. That's true. But should Western comics follow that path, or should it integrate technology more proactively? Assuming the goal is greater flexibility and keeping up with the volume currently released. Anyway, have a nice day and don't pick up any bad behaviors like racing with emergency vehicles. No problem. And there's some examples that you see on the screen there, which are absolutely copy and paste. The artist basically drew something once, and they're using it, over and over again. If you're relatively proficient in layers, you will, it's easy to do. It can be a time saver. So how where does that sit? Well, I mean, presuming that the artist is the one who drew the original picture, and presuming that same artist is the one who's using Photoshop to copy paste and make minor modifications, then, I mean, it is art under the artist's control. It's still that artist's vision. We may call it, lazy, or you may call it, taking shortcuts, but it's still, I think there's a big difference between that and, say, using AI art to generate a background or something that wasn't your work. This is reuse. I think some comic fans, collectors, people who are appreciative of art won't appreciate this. I think it will feel like the person is cutting a lot of corners in order to get a book out. What was a comment you made here in the mail? It says, assuming the goal is greater flexibility and keeping up with the volume currently released. I do think that, one of the problems there is trying to keep up with the volume currently released. I think the volume itself is a bit of a problem, or not just a bit, a major problem. And so I do think that there's a story to be told there, like in the world of kind of mass producing comics, in a world where you're putting out 80 books a month, shouldn't you logically, move to more systems like this where you're using, Photoshop to cut and paste and reuse panels? If it's an assembly line kind of thing, yeah. Look, I hate to break it to you, but if you go to McDonald's, you're getting a burger basically out of a factory. You're getting something that was kind of pre-made, pre-formed, put in. I mean, it's very much a mechanical system at that point. If you go to Arby's, you're just getting kind of weird, meat leftover sludge they've swept off the floor and put into a big vat, froze it, and then carved it up into little blocks vaguely resembling roast beef to try and trick people into thinking they're eating actual food. I mean, a lot of the, it's not like going to a restaurant where something is handmade. So I mean, but I think comics doesn't want you to view, them that way. Marvel doesn't want you to think of their comics like an assembly line, like, the books are just being vomited out. But there is a reality to, if you're doing 80 books a month, you're going to start to get more assembly line in your production. It's not going to be a handcrafted, bespoke piece of work. It's going to, people are going to do what this done here. But where is that line between, reuse of panels, like you're seeing in the examples on the screen, versus, doing AI art, versus tracing, like Greg Land? I said I wasn't going to mention his name anyway, but or doing that kind of stuff. Like, to me, the line is always like, is the artist who's putting the page together in control of all parts of the page? Meaning maybe they're copying, pasting, maybe they're reusing stuff, maybe they're, using lots of shortcuts to get the page done, but it's still all their own work. To me, I think that's acceptable. Might be a little frustrating depending on how far the person goes. I don't think these panels on this page are too egregious, but, I think that there's stuff like that. To me, that's where it sits. If the artist's doing everything themselves, it's fair game. Once the artist starts tracing somebody else's work, John Byrne pretty famously has been, quote unquote, sampled by tons and tons of creators. He's one of the most sampled artists, and it's because his work has pretty clean lines. It's easy to sample it. But I think that's when you start using art that's not your own, I think it's a problem. When you use photo reference, where you're looking at the page and recreating it, that's one thing. It's still your own work. When you're using a light table and completely trying to trace, I think that's a different thing. And then AI art is basically you're a programmer. You're not an artist. And again, there's nothing wrong with that. It is, again, unless you're stealing the work, but it is different from art. And maybe they should, instead of saying penciler and inker, they should say programmer, or guy who can run a script. I don't know. It is something. But there you go. So that's my take on it. That's kind of where I draw the line. I don't love when I see this stuff in a comic. I dislike it, especially when it's done poorly. And unfortunately, it often is done poorly. I always feel it's kind of cheap, but I get how it's done, why it's done. Anyway, great question. Thank you for the samples. Thank you for listening. What do the rest of you think? Where does that line sit for you? Let me know in the comments below. Like and subscribe, of course. And thanks for listening.